to Mayday Books. My name is Kristen Dooley. I'm a longtime member of Mayday Books, co-owner of all these books you see around me. Please do me the favor of buying all of them. Just letting you know that if you parked in a meter, they will come and get you and your hour or 2 hours are up, so make sure you keep track of time. There's a restroom walk behind the counter and take a right, and that's where the restroom is. And also we have coffee and some water back in the cove back there. Mayday Book has been around since 1975. It seems that way. We are all volunteer nonprofit bookstore. And we don't pay ourselves so that you guys can spend less money on books. All our books are always 15% off. And occasionally we get to do forums here. We have author visits, but today we decided, since what's gone on recently with Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, that it would be a good time to have a forum on what's happening and what we as a community should do in response. So we have 3 speakers tonight: Ann Martinson, Coleen Rowley, and the ever invisible. He's coming later. Mel. But so to get us started, please welcome Ann Martinson from WAMM.
Okay. I'm going to take a little bit different approach. One of my favorite writers is a man called Henry Giroux, who teaches at McMaster in Canada. And he's written an essay, and I'm going to use his title. It's called Rethinking Politics in the Society of the Image. And I'm going to read a few quotes from him, and then I'm going to talk a little more about Assange. So, audiovisual representations have transformed not only the landscape of cultural production and reception, but the nature of politics itself, particularly the relationship among nationalism, spectacular violence, and a new global politics. It's impossible to comprehend the political nature of the existing age without recognizing the centrality of the new visual media in all its forms. As you know, we got email and cam recorders and all kinds of phone recorders and all kinds of different media that's visual. So, as he goes on, as novelist and cultural critic Marina Warner puts it, in the realm of culture, the character of our representations matter most urgently. The images we circulate have the power to lead events, not only to report them. And the new technical media have altered experience and become interwoven with our consciousness itself. So, the force of culture is now writ large within circuits of global transmission that defy both military power of the state, but at the same time reinforcing the state's reliance on military power to respond to the external threat. And I have to think there of NATO expansion into 107 U.S. NATO bases, 170 countries. In the United States, the war against terrorism, with its requisite constant storyline of fear dominating every conceivable media outlet, creates the conditions for transforming a weak American democracy into a dangerous authoritarian state. The merging of spectacle, terrorism, war, and politics suggests something unique about the deadly power and the battle of images in contemporary global culture. A cinematic politics of the visceral has replaced the more measured and thoughtful commentary on human suffering and alienation, which was usually in print. Giroux uses shock and awe and the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center as examples. I bring this up because while these visuals are used as a tool to control U.S. citizens and others worldwide, in the case of collateral damage and all that short video visually explains and implies, I see the reason for the persecution and the attempted prosecution of Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. The Warmakers, the ruling elite who wish to control the world, including, of course, the USA, found this short video taking its place in global politics and belying all their efforts at spectacle, such as the light show that was shock and awe and the visuals of the demise of the towers and surrounding buildings, along with the people of courage who responded and the tragic deaths of others. I can play images of 9/11 back in my mind like a movie, too much like a movie, and that makes it almost unreal, as the disaster movies, as I call them, have so normalized that form of violence. Except, of course, it was real. Not as spectacular as shock and awe or as movie-like as the filming of 9/11 with the tragedies of the dead and injured and the many heroes, the collateral damage video nonetheless challenges all their efforts that have exploded under Trump to criminalize the media and to control the people through propaganda. Collateral damage takes its place on the stage of global politics, painting an extremely different picture of a non-benevolent and bullying government with a military arm killing innocent people and journalists with the ease of a pinball machine game or more recent sophisticated versions of the same, the apparent model for the drone-killing machines. WikiLeaks has leaked many other stories, types of documents, and so on. But the accusations that are presented by the Trump administration all focus on Assange and Manning, and that means above all the collateral damage video. The charges are not new. They're the same as the charges under the Obama administration. The Obama DOJ, the Department of Justice, ultimately understood the powerful perils for freedom of the press and all media worldwide by pursuing WikiLeaks and the relationship of a journalist, Assange, to his source, Manning, and decided not to prosecute. The Trump DOJ case evidently rests on the accusation that Assange was helping Manning to find classified information in databases by using a different user to protect her anonymity. Glenn Greenwald, in his article, The U.S. Government's Indictment of Julian Assange Poses Grave Threats to Press Freedoms, which is on The Intercept, and which I recommend reading, goes into great detail about why this is a specious charge. Because what Assange was doing was protecting his source, a long-standing right of journalists to protect the anonymity of their sources. Assange was not encouraging hacking. Manning was not hacking. So although the indictment does not cite hacking as a charge, the Trump DOJ sent out a press release that used the term hacking. Media across the country picked it up immediately and spread it across headlines. The release of Assange was on April 11th. On April 12th, having read Greenwald's article, I was in a store where the Star Tribune and Pioneer Press were displayed. Both had front-page articles about Assange that used hacking in the title. One of the characteristics of fascism is controlled mass media. I may not totally understand all the legal ramifications of an indictment of Assange, but even the experts are evidently unclear from what I've read on the web about how the indictment may play out legally. But what is clear to me are two threats. First, the threat to the rulers of U.S. empire, that the short and succinct video collateral damage embodies, and why Assange, WikiLeaks, and Manning, and others like them need to be silenced by the Warmakers because they tell the truth and counter propaganda. Second, the indictment is a grave threat to press and media. Second, the indictment is a grave threat to press and media freedom by criminalizing investigative journalism, which we need in a democracy, and is one more step in establishing an authoritarian fascist state. That's it. Thank you.
Well, I can't disagree with any of that. I think we're probably very far along on this at this point. This has been going on for, 18 years for sure after 9/11, and even beginning before that, and we're far along that spectrum towards fascism, I'm sorry to say. Freedom of the press is hanging by a thread at this point, really hanging by a thread. And it's being attacked through the indictment of WikiLeaks and Assange and imprisoning Manning for a second time, but also on a bunch of other levels. I don't know if any of you would have seen this on the way here, just a couple hours ago, I just saw it, but the president of Vets for Peace, Jerry Condon, was beat up and he had a bloody face outside of the Venezuelan embassy. And somebody took a picture and it is on Twitter. And guess what? They're censoring the picture of Jerry Condon.
No.
Yeah, it's a little thing. It's Mike Preisner. Mike Preisner posted it and said, here's a picture of Jerry Condon, and what you get, it says, this is sensitive material. No, there's bodies of children all over the internet, but his little bit of blood on his forehead, or some blood on his forehead, is sensitive material. So that's just the latest. Right, on the way here, I heard it looks like Jeremy Scahill's source on drone bombing targets is this 31-year-old Air Force officer, analyst, who then became a contractor. It looks like he's been identified, and they're going to try to get him life for telling Jeremy Scahill some of the drone bombing targets. So these are just the couple of strident examples, but it is hitting on all levels. Meanwhile, of course, true leaking from the highest levels, the Comeys, the Brennans, the Clappers, Hayden, they are leaking constantly. And Petraeus, got a little slap on his thing, but the people at the highest levels are controlling the media, as you just said, with propaganda. And so they, no matter what they say or do, they can't get anything. So it's only going to be these low underlings and their journalists. So I heard a lawyer, a talking head lawyer, call Assange puzzling and polarizing a couple days ago on the media. I've met Julian Assange 3 times in the Ecuador embassy. And you know what? He's a normal, very bright, very smart guy, but he's certainly not puzzling, except probably other journalists would see it as puzzling that you would sacrifice yourself for the truth in order to put out documents. He doesn't have the benefit as the 18 papers at the end of the Vietnam War, after the Washington Post was brave enough, and there was a reason why Bradley was brave enough, by the way, with Ellsberg on the Pentagon Papers. There's a reason for that. But they were the first, and then after that, 18 papers. Well, you know what? They had each other. So they had that comfort of not being alone. WikiLeaks was all alone, essentially, on this. And so, I think that's probably puzzling to most journalists. You're not, why are you doing this? What for? You can make a lot of money if you do what we're doing. He's polarizing is ridiculous too. If anything, there's complete bipartisan support for war in this country. Complete bipartisan. And in fact, Julian Assange, if you remember back during Bush's war, he was very popular with the liberals because he was putting out stuff, whatever, and he was popular. When he's accused now of cyberpunk and all these demonizing terms that he's accused of, now the liberals hate Assange. And that's the problem right now, is it became fully in agreement in our country that Assange is a terrible thing. And all of these epithets, he's called a rapist. I actually looked at 11 headlines a couple of days afterwards, and he's called every name in the book. Rapist, cyberpunk, activist, Russian agent. And there's about half of the articles, there were about 11, and most of them said fry him. these are other journalists. This is the problem. Is the only chance he has of an argument is that this is taking away freedom of press. We won't have a Washington Post or 18 newspapers. This isn't going to, probably won't happen now to watch what's happening to Assange, to be honest. Who in the heck would want to go down that route now? It's almost impossible. So the journalists are really shooting themselves in the foot here. And but some of the journalists weren't as bad. They said, yeah, we hate Assange, he's awful, but we don't want to be hurt ourselves. So the good op-eds were actually, saying that they don't want to be hurt themselves. And so please, government, find a way that you can somehow say, we're in the club, we're in the protected club. By the way, Bill Keller, former New York Times editor, during the lead up to the Iraq War, if you don't remember his famous headline, Kristen remembers it, his headline a week before the Iraq, 2 weeks before the Iraq War started was, "We're all in the War Hawk Club now," and that was the editor of the New York Times. So if they really do think we're on the side of the empire and this imperial militarism and whatever, so we'll be untouchable, and so that's their protection. Where was I? So it's not polarizing because everyone in the country agrees at this point that war is the answer. The only time Trump gets applauded is when he's bombing or threatening to bomb. And then the liberals all applaud him as well. It's just incredible the way these things have happened. I'm going to tell you about some of the shenanigans on the legal side. What the conversations between Manning and Assange occurred now 9+ years ago, like in 2010. That's when this conversation about how to protect his, get a password so he could protect his identity. And so normally with both conspiracy and computer access fraud, computer fraud, the statute of limitations is 5 years. You have to be charged in 5 years. Otherwise, murder doesn't have a statute of limitations, but most sex crimes, sometimes they can lengthen them because the victim has to grow up and then they remember. So there are some limited exceptions, but usually it's 5 years. So in this case, he got charged a year ago secretly in the indictment at a few days, I think a week or just a few days before 8 years. So how is it? There you go, right off the bat. How is that? How does that? That's illegal right off the bat. And the reason he didn't get charged under Obama was because they were worried about. There were some journalists at the time in Obama telling Holder and whatever that you're going to shut down the press, and as an editor, you're going to hurt us too. And that's why they deferred then and didn't indict him when it would have been within the 5-year statute of limitations. So Trump comes along, and it's Pompeo and all the rest, that are guiding him, and they decide that they would do it. Now, here's the shenanigan. You can be charged, 8 years is the outer limit, if you are called a terrorist. So Assange is actually now, in the indictment, he's indicted as a terrorist. So journalism has become an act of terrorism. This actually fits with a couple of things. One is we have a colleague, Sam, we have a group of, I don't know how many, 30 of us or so, and we all have written VIPs, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. It's retired CIA, Ray McGovern, and Larry Wilkerson, and Phil Giraldi. It's a whole bunch of people, all different agencies. We're all mostly retired, former people. And we wrote this op-ed in defense of Julian Assange. But one of our members has written an article that she has a source in the UK that he's being given. I won't be able to pronounce this. This drug, chemical called BZ is the acronym, 3-quinusclidinyl benzylate. This is something that's been given to people before. It basically fries your mind. You know, it's the CIA has been experimenting not only with torture methods and whatever, but they have long experimented. I think they experimented with LSD, if you remember right.
Yes.
But they've experimented with these things, and so has the military. And so the effects, I have an extra article here, I'll just read a couple of them. You become crazy, bizarre, rapid mumbling, picking obsessively at your bedclothes. You imagine things, you're hallucinating. It could actually be, you know, even something that's permanent. You know, permanent damage. If you know the story of Jose Padilla, you know, they tortured him and put him in isolation and stuff, and you lose your mind. You lose your mind. You really can never function again. And so if that's a real good answer, if you're even afraid of a court, if you're afraid of a court proceeding that might get somebody off, well, then they've already lost their mind, so they never can go back to whatever they were doing. By the way, guess who kept Jose Padilla in this torture thing? James Comey, the other hero, along with Robert Mueller. He's the hero of the day. So that's the thing, is he's charged as a terrorist, he's being tortured, and I'm just going to close, 2 more points here really quick. John Pilger, who is one of the strident defenders of Assange, came across a defense document in the UK. And this defense document, by their official, I guess it's their equivalent of Secretary of Defense, says that Great Britain faces 3 main threats to good public order. And the 3 main threats to good public order are the Russians, terrorists, and investigative journalists. And of the 3, the investigative journalists are the more serious threat. Okay, that's what the official thinking is, that investigative journalists are the most serious threats to good public order. So there you go. That's considered terrorism. Obviously, this all goes together. I have written an article way a long time ago, 2000, I don't even remember, but it was really successful. You know, I can hardly, 2010. Okay, 2010, I wrote this, WikiLeaks and 9/11, What If? Has anybody read it? Ever? It's Huffington, WikiLeaks and 9/11, What If? It was published in the Los Angeles Times, and it got a lot of clicks. And the point, and I co-wrote it with a guy who had found out that all of our airports were letting weapons through. And in fact, his name, Bogdan Djokovic, was an FAA red team guy. He went to everybody to try to get improvement, right up to the week before 9/11. I mean, one of them was Boston Logan Airport, and he went to Kerry, saying that Boston Logan Airport was so horrible. And that was one of the places that they came right through. Well, this poor guy just, you know, afterwards he became a whistleblower and everything else. So if what people don't understand about investigative journalism, we all kind of think about it as fraud, waste, and abuse, a whistleblower, you know, saving tax money if the Pentagon is charging $500 for a toilet seat or something like that. That's what people think of as whistleblowing. But frankly, it's actually a public safety issue. And my point is 9/11 could have easily been prevented if WikiLeaks had existed. Because you know why 9/11 happens is a failure to share information. And so what is WikiLeaks but a main way of sharing information? It's to getting it out to the public. You see the little boy that they're telling kids now in school that they have to actually tackle the shooter. Because there's no way that you're going to be able to stop it. The police aren't going to get there that soon. And the boy that got killed, it was on the news, they're telling kids if you get somebody shooting, you know, you can try to hide under your desk, but you know what? If you have a chance, try to go after them. The plane, and they actually said this is the same as the plane that went down in the Pennsylvania field because they had 10 minutes of knowledge of what was going on. So what I'm trying to explain, and I say it a lot better in the op-ed, is that it is a public safety. If people understood that it's our own public safety and not merely saving the lives of people that are being hit with drones in a foreign country, whatever. If you understand that whistleblowing and investigative journalism is our own public safety, and then you can convince other people to care about saving freedom of press. As it is right now, most people don't care. So I'm trying to think of ways that people will care about freedom of press. Otherwise, you just say, oh, it's the Constitution. John Hughes started this, by the way. After 9/11, 3 weeks, he wrote the first memo that said, we're in the time of war, imperial presidency gets to decide, and First Amendment no longer takes precedence. He said this in a very clever way.
I'm sorry, think of me as Wolf Blitzer. Breaking news, Chelsea Manning's been released.
Oh!
So just show up. Please continue, but I wanted people to know that because I thought it was good news. And somebody on our
Well,
feed.
we've got about 17 live viewers, and ML Fiala posted about
Yes,
Chelsea.
so-
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Mel, and if he doesn't want to say something good about Manning, I'm going to say something good about him. But her.
Yeah, no, that is good news. It's kind of surprising, actually, considering what's going on with Julian Assange. I'm going to try to be uncharacteristically short, brief. It's funny, you have this view of yourself, and other people have this view of yourself. So, right, over the years, people always nail me, Coleen has been guilty of it, and so is Kirsten. Now you got 3 minutes, you got 5 minutes, right? And sometimes I feign offense at it, but I know I can go on from time to time. I mean, stuff gets good to you, and you really want to put it out there. But I'm going to try to be a little brief. I'm a little under the weather, so forgive me for being late. But I reckon too that this was. That the snatching of Assange is a real serious thing right off the bat. And I'm glad we're doing this forum because it is something that ought to raise alarm bells. Julian, it kind of didn't make sense. It was like out of the blue, all of a sudden, the Ecuadorian embassy is like giving this guy up, and then I don't ever remember them having the charge. I don't remember them charging him. You guys probably remember, but I don't remember that they charged him with actually was pretty much stealing government property or trying to steal government. That's pretty much what it is. Stealing government secrets, isn't it? Pretty much, and everything he had, WikiLeaks had, was handed to them. So anyway, I was alarmed by it, and it happened around Easter weekend, and I'm a person of faith. So I actually put together a piece about it, and that way I can kind of go over this real quick, and then we can get to questions and answers, because I know you're tired of hearing us talk, so that way everybody gets to talk. We have real discussion. But this happened like right around Easter, and right around Easter weekend, I believe, wasn't it? And so, being a person of faith and a Christian, I always try around Easter to kind of spin something that's going on in the world to help people understand the Easter story from a real political perspective, because I see the resurrection thing as a kind of real revolutionary event, and that's a different story. So I put together a piece I called keeping that in light. And I said thinking about Good Friday and actually Thursday when Judas gave Jesus over, if you're familiar with the story. So I put together a title called the Ecuador, UK, U.S. corporate press played Julian Assange's Judas. Yeah, so I'm basically accusing them all of being Judas because they were all supposed to be in bed with him. So it should not have come as a surprise that not long after the Ecuadorian government received a $4.3 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund, that it sold out Julian Assange. U.S. empire and its well-paid nationalist scribes posing as objective journalists have a long memory. Now, by the way, they call themselves objective, but anybody that's an activist, and we write, we are called advocacy journalists, right? But they are advocacy journalists as well, right? Because they're advocating for the system as it is. So the well-paid scribes, I call them posing. I call them posers. Posing as objective journalists have a long memory, and they never ever forgive those who expose its criminality, especially its evil underbelly. So they aim to put, and I'm talking about the system, the U.S. empire, so they aim to put Assange on the cross to serve as a warning to all potential investigative journalists and muckrakers who were dear followers of his footsteps, that this is what will happen to you. While the Ecuadorians cut a deal, the U.S. corporate press, which by the way made a hefty profit from printing WikiLeaks documents, by the way, they sold Assange out for much less and have gone on a spurious and unscrupulous campaign of character assassination and defamation, which Coleen really talked to. and in doing so have cast off all appearances of objectivity and fairness and have attacked him because he has gored their favorite ox, U.S. imperialism. Even the high-minded newspaper of record, the New York Times, got in the dirt calling Assange a scraggly bearded refugee. Now, I don't ever remember them disparaging people like this. I mean, I'm sure they've done it, but I don't remember, this is the kind of stuff they reserve for black people, Some sophisticated journalists have stopped just short of calling him and his mother. I wrote it here for folks who anyway, I'm going to skip over that. Where I grew up, if you called somebody's mother a stink bee, that was a real shot at her. So I was joking. I wrote that they did everything, but they just stopped short of calling his mother a stink so and so. And so I said they may as well have, because they called him just about everything else, and they really did. I mean, if you do a Google search of the articles that came out that Julian Assange got arrested, you would have thought that he was a mass murderer, or something really low, or he had done something bad to children or something, because they really disparaged this guy. So speaking of the pot calling the kettle black, the New York Times in an editorial accused Assange of having an outsized view of its own importance. Yeah, imagine that, right? Who has more outsized view of their own importance than the New York Times? Right? But the favorite term was narcissist. So clearly they're ignorant of his definition, because practically every corporate news outlet, every corporate news outlet screams, right? Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, right? Look at me, watch us because, and there's not much difference, as you all have observed. Meghan McCain even went as far as to say that she wished that he would rot in hell, which I thought was an interesting choice of words, considering that her dad, John McCain, is surely there. The National Review seemed to take WikiLeaks exposures quite personally, but they were more honest in explaining why they didn't like him, accusing him of being anti-American, and described his work as vile spite, intent on harming the good old USA. But at least they were honest, right? Even a not-so-funny Saturday Night Live's Colin Jost got in a dig calling Assange an internet troll who finally got dragged into the sunlight. Now, if you watch this, he's not that funny. CNN, along with a few journalists, have gone as far to claim that Assange was not a journalist, but an activist. Again, kettle meat pot. Because as you recall, CNN and other mainstream, I knew that was going to happen. As you recall, CNN and other mainstream news agencies broadcast the beginning stages of the U.S.'s illegal and immoral war in Iraq as if they were broadcasting an athletic event. Anybody remember that? Right? What was that thing? The shock and awe was like a TV event or something. It was insane. And people who I gave credit for being human beings were not acting very human in that day. They were cheering because what was happening as a result of those bombs and explosions, people were dying. People used to have even more respect for their enemies than that. So actually they broadcast it as if they were sitting on the sidelines cheering on their favorite team as missiles rained down on Baghdad, taking human life. And they chose to report on the wars in the initial stages as embedded rather than impartial reporters, remember? CNN, Fox, MSNBC, nor any of the U.S.'s trusted news outlets are objective journalists, but serve as cheerleaders, advocates, and by extension, activists for U.S. imperialism. One cheers for the conservative wing, and the other cheers for the more moderate liberal cabal. I made the point that prostitutes have more integrity. Oddly, the New York Times even disparaged the WikiLeaks founder's hygiene, parroting lies from the Ecuadorians who went as far as to say that Assange smeared feces in his room. And my point was, any distraction from the issue at hand will do. I mean, that means that they're really serious. I mean, they're saying that he smelled bad. It's like, what I'm saying? We don't like you. We don't like what you got to say, and you smell bad. That's stooping real low, So, I mean, that's honest. So if they ever say that you smell bad, that's actually not a bad thing. That means that they really hate your guts. And even if his hygiene was poor, it has nothing to do with why he was so loud. And nothing stinks more than the hundreds of thousands of decaying bodies and gallons of dry blood and hundreds of body parts strewn about and left in the wake of the amoral and immoral intervention in the sovereign countries of Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's just an immoral drone missile campaign. Nothing is as pernicious and as foul-smelling as U.S. dungeons and the hellhole known as Guantanamo Bay, which reeks of the sweat, body odor, fear, and anguish of tortured human beings. These organs of capital have lost their cool because Assange has exposed the hype, the hypocrisy, and the hatefulness of a country that preaches the merits of democracy, yet everywhere it undermines democracy and dictates to others, usually at the barrel of a gun. Assange has exposed the empty rhetoric and the myth of the U.S.'s enduring love for humanity, who, as Frantz Fanon once said, they're never done talking of man, yet murder men everywhere they find them, at the corner of every one of their streets, in all corners of the globe. Highly respected journalist and investigative reporter John Pilger has said that some of the enmity the press has displayed toward the Australian comes from resentment harbored toward him because his honesty and dedication reveal their own subservience to power. Assange's publication of the secrets of U.S. war and skullduggery passed down to him by Chelsea Manning shed light on how U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were actually conducted. Consequently, the sound and fury castigating and disparaging Assange has nothing to do with the specious and unsubstantiated charge that he was illegally trying to gain access to a government computer. They're angry, they're pissed off because he exposed the true nature of the U.S. conflict in the Middle East. I'm almost done. Moreover, the wars conducted in Iraq and Afghanistan, indirectly in Pakistan, Somalia, and Syria are unjust, immoral, and racist, and are being carried out in the only way a country dedicated to white supremacy, let me say that again, they're carried out in the only way that a country dedicated to white supremacy could. That is, without regard to civilian lives, because in truth, and Americans learned this from birth, there are no innocent civilians. Read that as, there are no innocent people of color. I use the N-word. In this case, the Iraqis are sand niggers. Let me just throw it out there. Incidentally, this explains why many white folks and some black folks quickly fault black folks when they're gunned down by the cops, because, you know, the black person had to be guilty of something, because we're kind of taught to think like that. Ultimately, the press and the government are most outraged that Assange released the now-famous video of a couple of good old American boys in a U.S. aircraft killing unarmed Iraqi civilians, including two Reuters reporters, and delivering a double tap in an effort to kill those who came to the aid of the wounded. And the murderers laughed afterward. Assange's enemies are angry because that video alone was symbolic of the cavalier attitude that the U.S. has toward the lives of others, especially those who are not white. We remain silent at our own peril. The government and its well-paid lapdogs are playing for keeps. Folks in the U.S. are quietly trading their freedoms for comfort, but ironically, in truth, both are temporary, and if we continue to bury our heads in the sand, we will have neither. If the U.S. government, and not we, is able to successfully, because you know people say we and our, and I always stop people with this. No, 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 it's not your government. If it was, we wouldn't be in this damn predicament.
Yeah.
If the U.S. government is able to successfully bury Assange in one of his dungeons after making false allegations and charges stick, investigative journalism critical of empire, will be in peril, because one of the near sacred pillars of our supposed democracy will have been damaged.
Thank you. I am going to pass around the hat. This is to pay for flyers and other things. Also, if there's anybody here who would not like to be filmed during the discussion or whatever, Carla may be panning the camera about. Let her know that you want your face blocked out or something. Now it's time for questions. Please keep your questions short and have them be questions, and instead of statements. And I'm going to let these guys run it until one of you misbehaves, and then I'll jump up and stop you. So,
Okay, Coleen is
Such
gonna,
violent language.
oh, yeah.
Coleen is going to, manage all the questions.
Colin, we go over, we referred to Jose Padilla. I'm sure a lot of people in my radio audience, maybe even here, won't know who that is, and what the gravity of their comparison to him is.
He was one of the first people picked up he wasn't sent to a black site, but he was detained without, I mean, again, this is John Yoo after 3 weeks, couple weeks writing that the constitutional rights, Fourth Amendment right against seizure, search and seizure, which requires probable cause, you have to be charged. He was never charged, he was just held, just like the other people in the black sites. And he was held incommunicado without an attorney, I want to say for almost 3 years. And when you're held like this in a small little area, and I think there were other things that happened to him, he was essentially tortured. And he now really has had permanent damage, permanent brain damage. And, this is the belief that this has happened to other people as well. But when this happened, Comey wrote a glowing thing about this is great and whatever. He defended the practice of holding somebody, detaining them indefinitely, without charges, completely violating the Constitution. And it's good that Manning has avoided that fate, because he could have been held for 18 months just on this grand jury. And then I think they probably could have even concocted another grand jury, and it could have even gone on longer. If you think about it, there was 2 or 3 reasons they were holding him. They were trying to this is part of the shenanigans after the indictment, why it's not, they don't have the substance of what he did. Why else would they go get somebody who's already done 7 years and put them in prison, trying to get them now to say something more? Now, there is a chance, Manning was tortured already, and, I haven't met him personally, sorry, I haven't met her personally. I did protest outside of Quantico when she was being held, and, but I think there is some chance that she might have been, gotten some illness there too. Who knows? It's hard to say.
Let me throw in about the Padilla thing. So he was put in solitary confinement. He was they had him in a supermax, and they literally drove him crazy. In fact, the last time he came to court, they found him not competent to stand trial. He was competent beforehand. But the other significant thing about Padilla was they grabbed him and pretty much violated all his rights. They pretty much said he didn't have any. But they accused him of bringing a dirty bomb. Now, what's wild about this is what the press is complicit. So, you hear dirty bomb, you don't know what to think. Maybe something you can put in your pocket. But, the truth of the matter is that a dirty bomb would take up half this room. Yes. So they had you thinking that it was just something you can carry around in a suitcase, but the scientists have come out and said, no, you can't carry around a dirty bomb. But the press kept putting that out. So Padilla didn't have a chance. Speaking of the press kept making it appear, because he was also a former gang member out of Chicago, kept making it appear that he was guilty. I saw very little outside the activist press of anything that objectively, talked about this man. They just kind of threw him away.
And ultimately, because he wasn't charged, I think a lot of it was baloney. And some of it may have even come from torture. I mean, the CIA claims that they torture good information out of people, and they were trying to torture Zubaida, who wasn't even the person they thought he was. So they're torturing even the wrong person. They thought he was a high-level Al-Qaeda, and he wasn't. So this whole thing, again, after 9/11, things start to really go bad.
So, when Chelsea Manning was released, I think last year or the year before, she got to go on Twitter and everything, and she kind of came off as this media darling. A lot of younger people thought that she was going to become this Democratic candidate and kind of go into politics. But it seems like there's just been this huge reversal of perception about her, almost intentionally. It's kind of really surreal, because I remember her being released and everyone being very excited and having a lot of social media support, and now she's going through all of this again. And I'm kind of curious about how those sea changes so quickly replaced each other.
Your remembrance of history is different from mine.
She did run. She did try to run, actually.
And she was castigated, and maybe she might have been welcome in the activist community, but she wasn't. I don't remember her being just welcome. I mean, she wasn't active, but not in the general community. But she was talking about running, for a minute. But I don't remember it that way.
She did launch, at least try to launch a campaign. I think the main thing that's happened in the meantime that's changed public opinion both on Assange and Manning is Russiagate. And so you had that group of people that were in support of Assange and Manning and free press and whistleblowing and all this, that now, because of claiming that that Assange was part of the leaks that caused Hillary Clinton to lose, and we ended up with Trump, and that has worked like a charm to get this other segment of people to totally flip. Even Rachel Maddow, for instance, she wrote a book against war. She wrote an entire book against war. You wouldn't know it now. Now she wants to, she's got, demonizes and wants to go to war with Russia. And that's a whole bunch of people. And so I think that is really what's hurt. People see this in very partisan lenses. And that's, I think, what has been the change. I wouldn't put it past, now, being in jail this long, all kinds of things could have happened. She could have been talked to by the FBI and all kinds of people. That's what happens in reality in a lot of these cases. If you know how quote unquote cooperating witnesses and all the rest. We don't know at this point, and we just have to. I think she never talked. She for 7 years, even though she was being tortured, she was very stoic, and she did try to commit suicide a couple of times. The other reason she might have been let go is maybe she was trying to commit suicide again. That's possible. That's another reason. In fact, that was part of the reason why Obama, commuted her sentence, was because of the suicide issue. And he didn't want to see that happen. And so there's all kinds of reasons. I'm just speculating as to a few, but I have no idea why she was let go this soon. But there's no doubt that she was in prison to try to torture her to further inculpate Assange. Yeah, absolutely.
Just a note, they're saying the grand jury expired, which is why she was let out. But a new one will start next week, and they might pick her up again. So.
Oh my gosh.
Is what the government most worried about is that the truth about 9/11 will come out from the leakers and the involvement of the United States government?
Anybody want to take that one? I think myself that if there was more, I think 18 years, I think there probably would be more information if there was more to come out. The NSA and the CIA, okay, the last bit that did come out was the 28 pages. And that took all this time. It took up until about 2 years ago. And that was all still blackened out because it was a pretty close person with Bush, Bandar bin Sultan, in the 28 pages say that he was one of the possible sources of funding for the terrorist attackers. And that was covered up all these years, about 15 years. Even when the head of the Joint Intelligence Committee wrote a book about it, Graham. That's pretty incredible that some big piece like this. The families were suing Saudi Arabia. They were not allowed to sue Saudi Arabia. 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis. And now, by the way, Israel and Saudi Arabia are just, entwined with this war on Yemen, killing all these civilians. And, trying to get us to go, both of them are trying to get us to go to war on Iran right now. And so there's things like that if you explain the foreign policy, but that was covered up for a long time. We still don't know. The CIA has never told us why they did not share information with the FBI. 2 of the hijackers that they had been following for over 2 years came into California, and they kept it quiet until like 2 weeks ahead of time. They've never come clean about that. The NSA has not come clean about the fact that they were monitoring the hub in Yemen that everybody was calling into to talk about these things. They were talking in code, but they were calling in. They didn't have a whistleblower in either the NSA or the CIA. The FBI was the only one that had a whistleblower. And, so there's some things like that, but I don't think that there's a whole lot more that would, my opinion is I don't know what it would be myself. Yes.
So what about when Pompeo was being questioned by Rand Paul? They were actually trying to connect 9/11 to Iran. Do you
Yes.
remember that? You know, and even during Obama's time, some court in New York actually, they, I guess, found Iran guilty because they weren't there to defend themselves. So now families can sue them, and then they can freeze their assets. So how do they? I mean,
That's right. And there is even an earlier precedent because, you know, our government will say that Iran is the biggest purveyor of terrorism in the Mideast, just as they said it before for Iraq. They said the same thing. You know, they tried to connect Iraq with 9/11. And Iraq, Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. They're the opposites. They're the Shiites, and they're actually enemies. The Saudi Wahhabi people are enemies with the Shiites. They execute Shiites in Saudi Arabia. They behead them and everything else. It's like the craziest thing in the world, but because people don't know these things, Mideast, they believe, oh, Iraq, Iran, they're all the same. A district court charged and convicted Iran of 9/11. And it was basically because if somebody came through with a visa was stamped in Iran or something like that. The earlier precedent, and I hate to even say this, but I've said it publicly a couple times now. The prior director of the FBI before Mueller was Louis Freeh. And he left in June of 2001, 2 months before 9/11. His last day in the office, his last day after 7 years, he indicted Iranians for the bombing of Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia that killed 19 young Americans and wounded 100. And that was as far, and I'm not the only person saying this, our former Secretary of Defense, if you read Gareth Porter's written a whole long pieces about this. This was a complete false frame-up of Iran for the bombing of Khobar Towers. It was almost certainly Al-Qaeda. And what Saudi Arabia did is they just manipulated the FBI completely, and Louis Freeh, they would not allow the FBI to have access. Louis Freeh micromanaged the case, and he promised the families that he would indict someone, and on his last day he indicted Iran. Saudi Arabia killed the Al-Qaeda people so that they could never talk. We had one family in Minnesota who lost their son. And I'm thinking back, I was the victim witness coordinator I was the intermediary with that family. And I now in hindsight realize I was lying to that family. And I can't even believe I did this now, you know, because I had no way of knowing how bad this was. But if you read Gareth Porter's, this was all made up. And now Perry, I think it's Perry, the Secretary of Defense at the time, who says it's not true. It had to have been Al-Qaeda. So that's how bad it is. You know, in terms of framing, it's the same as we did in Iraq. We shouldn't, you know, Yemen, we're doing the same thing on Syria, Yemen. We make up facts. And it's what Sue Ann was saying about everything is perception management now. Spectacle, theater. You know, it's kind of like these dystopian novels that were written years ago that we never thought we'd get into this, you know, where Zero Dark 30 is completely fake fact. It is completely, and yet 58% of all people believe torture works because they saw a beautiful redhead CIA girl get information from somebody by torturing them. And it's completely made up. And Leon Panetta, CIA guy, was part of the making up the story. Our top officials are involved in this. And that's why investigative journalism is the enemy. Because it interferes with putting out these false, you know, fake news. It interferes with trying to manipulate and keep good public order, which is we're telling you what to think. So you'll all go to war with Iraq, you'll all cheer for war with Iran, war with Venezuela. You know, we only have like two right now, I think 2 presidential candidates who have hesitated about the regime change and completely illegal. They pick a guy and tell him he's president. You know, it's completely illegal. We have the vet.
And then they beat up Jerry Condon.
And they're beating up a lot of people.
I know, but
And they're they turned off the water and the electricity to the place. And that's owned by Venezuela. Completely illegal. And yet, you know, none of our leaders are speaking up against it. So most people think, you know, Venezuela is a terrible place, and we're the policemen trying to save them. We're trying to save Venezuelans.
Code Pink has occupied it.
So, and Vet for Peace and Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers, but they don't have food, and now they have no electricity or water.
And they're being beaten up.
And they're being beaten up, yeah. Was there anybody else back there?
Well, the biggest thing I think going on is the Democrats trying to establish the Russiagate thing. Now, it seems to me, in the late days of Obama, that the Democrats were saying, oh yeah, we could have a little war in Eastern Europe, around the Ukraine, and no big deal. And then we had the intercepted talks by that woman from the U.S. State Department about who they wanted to put into
Victoria Nuland.
Victoria Nuland. And so you could see, you know, I would say that Putin, all of us, he could see what the U.S. was trying to do, because they had the NATO going all up and down there. They were going to try and take away his base at Sevastopol, his naval base. So that's why he went in there. But it would be to his credit. I mean, if Hillary Clinton was looking for war on Russia, or being even reckless with it, maybe it would be a wise thing to push for this Yahoo Trump, whatever. Anyway, give your own opinion about this Russiagate. What does that mean? Because this is what's the Democrats are usually justified.
Again and again and again they use that to justify, and I totally disagree, well, pretty totally disagree with it. Now the story is the Russians did give money, but they laundered it through the Trump towers. That's the story I heard. I don't have any source or any, you know, just people talking about it. But I do know that that isn't what lost Hillary the election. I mean, we all know she got 3 million more votes. But it was the GOP, now Greg Palast has this fantastic movie called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. And it's the post-election version that you want. You can go to his website, and I think you can stream it, and he is asking a little bit of money, but $5 or something, or you can buy it. And we showed it at the WAMM movies. And the GOP used every possible trick in the book. And it's the gerrymandering, this is especially in the South, but then gerrymandering, the cross-checking of names when people, and this even went over state lines, when somebody would have a name like Johnny Johnson in Minnesota, that would be the equivalent. They were mostly Hispanic and black names. And they wouldn't include the middle names. So then they were really similar. Because there's certain patterns in cultures of names. I mean, just like, you know, our Scandinavians are all SONs like me. So, you know, and that's a big piece of it. And then, anyway, he goes, and then, you know, not letting older people who voted all their lives but just don't happen to have a driver's license. I mean, there were all kinds of things like that. And so that movie, that's really what lost the election. The people who were barred from voting. And they were mostly people of color. Almost all. And so I really think that we talk again about Russia this and Russia that, and as far as I know, they've never proved any hacking. They've attempted to again and again. But I just, you know, I think it's part of this, you know, we gotta have an enemy, so we're gonna pick on Russia. I mean, I don't, because they're the traditional enemy and they're trying to bring back the 50s with the Red Menace. Huh. I mean, no, but they're, I mean, and they don't like socialists, of course. So, but I just think everybody should see that movie because you'll see how the GOP stole the election.
And the Russiagate thing is a distraction. You know, I mean, we've got an election coming up, and the best the Democrats can do is keep crying about impeaching Trump. I mean, he's almost done with his term now. You know, even if you would actually start the proceedings, you know, it wouldn't happen until after he was out of office, right? So, you know, it's a little bit ridiculous. You know, we're here catching hell, and the party that people keep depending on or relying on to come to the rescue, you know, which, you know, you should probably get that up by now. Well, you think, they keep saying we're going to come to the rescue, and you keep holding on, and you keep waiting and waiting and waiting, and generation after generation keeps waiting for these liberal folks to come and save us, and they haven't done it yet. You think that maybe, just maybe, we might put our stuff together and come up with a third party or something. I'm just but the Russiagate thing is a distraction, right? They're at the bar. It's all a game. In fact, I saw a piece today from just a regular corporate writer, somebody who pretty much said, I think the only people paying attention to this stuff are the people in Washington, right? Because for everybody else, the bills got to get paid, right? How I'm going to eat tomorrow, right? That's a concern. I'm going to keep the roof over here. I'm going to keep my job. My kids are going to be able to afford. Those are the things that are important to us. The healthcare thing is crazy. Right? And we got our kids dropping dead. Nobody talks about it. Right? Kids are dropping dead left and right. At least when black folks are going through the drugstores, they talked about it, even if it wasn't to just make us look bad. But, white kids are falling out left and right, and nobody's talking about it. They're dying. People are dying. Anyway, these issues are important. The Russiagate is a distraction. Think about what they did. Mueller is a former head of the FBI, right? Man, think about
12 years.
Yeah, and who else helped you put? It's like all these CIA and FBI folks saying, "Hey, this is the truth." Really? You know what I'm saying? Trust us. It's ridiculous. Rachel Maddow's on everything. Well, wait till you see what's in the report. Everybody, wait till you see. Well, what? There's nothing in the daggone report that's just going to really advance us. Yeah, stuff has been redacted and all that, but there's nothing really there. We know that Trump is a piece of crap. That's not news, right? Who's working. None of this is news, right? But in the meantime, real news has been taken off the front page. You're not seeing it. So we don't get an analysis of what's going on in Venezuela. Not a decent one, right? We don't know what's going on in Flint. The things that are really happening day to day, those things are being taken off the front page. What's going on in Iraq, the war budget, the things that we ought to be thinking about and pushing back on. They're not talking about those things, right? We're not getting a lot of news because this is dominated. So that's the problem with Russiagate. It's just, Russiagate, Russia, to the detriment of everything else. You want to say something?
Yeah, I think Russiagate's been a really adept, effective manipulation of the media. So if you read the Mueller report, you won't even see any evidence about how he did have an indictment, but you can indict a ham sandwich. And since he knew the Russians would not come here to get into court, 13 Russians were, he indicted 2 indictments. One was for hacking, and the other one was for trolling, or clickbait on Facebook. So there's 2. And so there's no real evidence of this. And it's very, very specious. Mueller has a terrible track record. I've written this, my gosh, and I scratched the surface on my Huffington Post about Comey and Mueller. Comey and Mueller, Comey signed off on torture. Mueller did the roundup of the innocent people. He actually fingered the wrong person as the anthrax killer. He and Comey together, by the way, the 2 of them. The government had to pay $5 million to Stephen Hatfield, who they practically caused to have a nervous breakdown all those years. That was Mueller and Comey. So you put him on a pedestal as if he knows everything when he's been wrong. And the Boston newspaper, this is the worst thing that I know, and I know it from, I know it a little bit from just the way things work, but it's in the Boston newspaper. During the time that the FBI was operating Whitey Bulger in Boston for 20 years, and he was killing people, lots of people. And guess what? He was the FBI's, this is how we operate proxy forces in foreign countries, and we do the same thing here.
Yes.
And there were others as well being operated, and they were murderers. They were called top echelon. Top echelon. Well, who the heck had a bright idea of operating top echelon organized criminals? But there were more than one. But Bulger wasn't the only one. My supervisor operated Scarpa, who was also murdering people in New York City. So Mueller, there's a letter that the Boston newspaper says that Robert Mueller writes to keep the 4 guys that the FBI framed as committing the murders that Whitey Bulger, to protect Whitey Bulger because he was their guy. And to protect him, they framed 4 guys. 2 of them died in prison. And finally, they won a lawsuit, these 4. And by the way, the only way they found this out, after operating this murderer for all these times, is a curious judge found the informant file and started saying, oh my gosh. That's the only way this came out. This is years ago, by the way. Bulger just died last year. Mueller writes a letter to the prison to keep these 4 guys in prison. So there's your wonderful Rachel Maddow hope for, taking down Trump that she thought. I mean, these people have no, very little integrity. And Mueller's never admitted any wrong, at least Comey, to his credit, probably the best thing Al Franken did was he grilled Comey when Comey was up to be nominated about the fact, why did you sign off on somebody having sleep deprivation for 100 hours and, waterboarding and all this? Why did you sign up? And Comey was like sweating bullets trying to explain why he had approved all of these things. To his credit, Franken got Comey to say that was wrong. Mueller has done a whole lot of wrong things, and he's never admitted he was wrong about anything. And because he's a Vietnam Purple Heart, and they're all both tall. Comey's really tall. They have the Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and people in the country think of them as gods. And I worked with a bunch of these guys, and they all make mistakes. Louis Freeh indicted the wrong people for a bombing, and we lied to the families about who did the bombing. That's incredible.
I just wanted to go, what Mel was saying. One of the, and I mentioned this, one of the things that shows a fascist government is controlled mass media. And that's exactly what we've been talking about. Colleen's talked about it, I've talked about it, Mel's talked about it. That we certainly, the mainstream corporate media, we are not getting any good information, or very little if it trickles through. And if it is, it's always on page 5 in the 10th paragraph. You know what I mean.
In the Washington Post in the lead up to Iraq, Pincus was the one guy who was asking questions about it's not all true. Page 19 in the Washington Post. And I just want a quick mention about Civil War. I know this is whatever. During the Civil War, the government jailed editors for not being with the program. Abraham Lincoln jailed editors. There was no freedom of press or freedom of speech back during the Civil War. And it came to be called the common law of war. That's what John Yoo was picking up on when he wrote this right after 9/11. That now we're in war, and we don't have to have the normal, freedom of press, 4th Amendment, 5th Amendment, all those things. Unfortunately, there are briefs now, official government briefs, that cite to this old 1860 era where we're in the common law of war, which means there is no freedom. This is why they can jail people and all the rest. You can censor the media. Facebook now is censoring big time. We were talking before this started, and my clicks, I've got 10,000. And I was always getting 40 or 50 up until a couple of days ago, and they've gone way down all suddenly. Our colleague, Craig Murray, who is the one who in Great Britain, and he claims that he had a personal knowledge that it was not hacked, that he knows who this source was. Our government would never even question. Mueller did all these questions, but he won't question Craig Murray, who says, and he was a former British diplomat. And now he's just censored off of Facebook. And because he wrote it, an Israeli general's own words about shooting children that have come too close to the border wall. So Murray wrote the exact translation of what the Israeli general said about killing Palestinian children that come too close to the wall, and he's kicked off, censored from Facebook now. And that's the other thing that's going on, which is that we are in this situation of fascism.
I'm surprised, Coleen, that you haven't noticed a drop before. Certainly I have on Rise Up Times, but all the good alternative media sites are saying that their click rates dropped significantly, very significantly. And this happened, probably 6 months to a year ago even.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking of things like, why can't I think of them right now? Help me.
WS, theirs went
Well,
down 60%.
that one
Yeah.
one was the first one to go,
Yeah.
the World Socialist. And-
Consortium News.
Yeah.
They published a blacklist,
Yeah.
all made up, concocted. It was called Prop or Not. And they had Truth Dig and Consortium News. They had about 200 blacklisted sites. And it was completely made up by it's Elliot Higgins, and there's a whole group of these people working in cahoots with each other. And they had to kind of back off of it because some of the sites were award-winning, but some of them were Alex Jones, and Alex Jones has been completely censored now. So, and another one of our group, Peter Van Buren. I don't know if anybody's ever read his books.
Yeah.
We Meant Well. He was in Iraq during the Reconstruction, but he spoke out and said no, it was completely wrong. And he wrote this book, We Meant Well, and the State Department didn't want him to publish it. He's been censored off of all the social media now. And he's writing for great articles. He's written 3 books. But that's what's going on. And again, I just think it's very short-sighted of our regular journalism to think somehow they're untouchable because they're in the imperialism and basically being for war. You can't, you say something that you're, hesitating against war, even the regime change on Venezuela. That's why you're not getting the politicians to mention it.
Mid-Press News is our own local that's also being censored. And so, it's local, but it's national and international. I just know that it's very real. You can see the censorship, and I see it sometimes on Facebook too when I try to post for Rise Up Times. They try to limit me in any way they can possible.
Yeah, I went to a game night. Okay, we played games, and I got a bunch of Democrats. Were playing games, board games. Okay, and the Assange thing came up, and they were all joking about cat poop and look at his hairdo. And I was like, guys, this isn't what it's about. But these are normal Democrats. So they're taking in, but these are intelligent people ostensibly, And so the question is, is how much of the population is getting stuck, is believing this stuff, or I don't have a handle on it. I can't believe that most people are buying everything that's said on the news. We're all news junkies, probably most of us, but a lot of people aren't. But I'm just wondering if you got any feeling about that. And just on the censorship, Lee Camp you're going to take him off YouTube. He's worried about that right now. So again, this whole censorship slowly creeping in. Anyway, sorry.
I got some thoughts about that. I think with this, the millennials and the generation that came, they've been taught to self-censor on some level, and that's not to pick on you all. I'm looking for the, how to say but for people, and what I mean by that is, Twitter is about limiting. For an English teacher, it's good. Right? You want to limit. You want to say it and want to limit it. Right? You want to be concise and to the point. But you don't always want to do that, right? And so, on some level, the new technological advances have caused us to self-censor. So the less information you take in, the less information you're able to evaluate. That makes sense? And so it's good to make things concise and to the point, whatever that. There's a place for that. But I think the bourgeois philosophy, bourgeois society is getting people to not dig deeper into stuff. Like I write pieces, I try to limit to 1,000 words, right? A lot of times I don't succeed, so I do 1,200, but I don't, really write I'm really conscious of it. And people still push back and sometimes don't read my stuff. And I said, well, I'm going to continue to at least go from 800 because you have to take a little longer, like we're doing here, to really examine a situation, all right, and to analyze an issue. And if you don't do it, your move is to what? Just take the first thing you see and run with it. to sort of your question, that's what people are doing. They're taking the first thing they see, right, and then there's only a little blurb here. You don't get all the facts, and you just run with it. I think that some of the technology is actually leading us down that road that we don't explore things. And the other thing I was thinking about as I'm sitting here, you realize that Facebook and Instagram and all those things are institutions, all right? They're industries, right? They're corporations. They're making a lot of money. Google is making a lot of money, right? What system are they working with that makes all this money? You got to think this through, right? They're capitalists for all practical purpose. So they have an interest in maintaining things as they are. I'm going to repeat that. Google, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, they have an interest in maintaining things as they are. Why? Because it helps their bottom line. You got to remember, when you get up in this rarefied air, there's some rules. Otherwise, they throw you back down to earth. But there's some rules, and you can see Zuckerberg dealing with it, right? They put pressure on Zuckerberg. You can tell. You can see it. You can see it almost in his face. He's under pressure, right? They put pressure on these folks. You got to censor that device, man. I know before you let people say whatever they want to say. No. That's not in our best interest. And so that's why Google is censoring what comes up when you do a search. It's not a pure search. And for us to think that it is, we're kidding ourselves. You know what I'm saying? In a capitalist system, in capitalist America, everything has to go through that censor, kind of that seat. You know what I'm saying? Everything is what am I trying to say? Pushed through that. So it's not innocent. And so we shouldn't be surprised. What we have to do is stay a step ahead of them. You know, we've got to find out some new technology the way we can get our word out, right? Maybe even, fall back on some old stuff, like young people always hate when I have flyers. So this has some pass out flyers. And it's like, the flyer works, crying out loud. If you read it, that event's going on. Right? We got so spoiled by technology. Anyway, that's my thought of it.
The NSA has at least 6 very large centers across the country. Do you have an idea of what they're doing?
Vacuuming up everything. They're vacuuming up all. The one thing that they said they were going to drop was this, one of the massive data collection things. A couple weeks ago, they said they hadn't gotten a thing from it after all these years. And so there was a pilot group or something that had recommended that they drop it. You didn't know that after Snowden came out. Oh no, we've got all these examples where we've saved lives and whatever, so they all lied about this. That was another thing they lied about. And then they said no, they said they had 54 cases, they had 54 examples, and then they could only come up with one. Now, a pilot group has actually said that they, after all of this billions and billions of data collected, that they couldn't really find any good that had come of it. And so they're recommending to close one portion. That isn't going to close. They're making too much money to close it all down. And so they already have the facilities. But essentially, they are vacuuming up all of the communication data. And we have a couple of the people in my group were whistleblowers for the NSA. Thomas Drake and William Binney and Kirk Wiebe. And they've documented that it was all, Snowden's documents do this too. But Binney was before Snowden. He was a whistleblower. So was Drake. They were whistleblowers before Snowden. And so they're keeping everything. Probably this is my little insight. I'm trying to think of where this comes from. When they learn of some of these things that they can't talk about, so Mueller came up a long time ago with something called parallel construction. So if they learn through the NSA's monitoring of some, let's just say a plain old drug deal or something like that, and they learn of it through this vacuuming up of data on Americans, well, they can't go and indict you based on the NSA intercept. So going back to Russiagate, there's a lot of communications that they wouldn't be able to use in those indictments that they knew about, and it may actually have gotten Mueller into trouble. And so what they do then is they go back and then they find other ways because they know they've already gotten you some, sex crimes online, all different things. If they've gotten it, we say illegally, it is illegal because they were monitoring Americans. And so for a long period of time they've been doing this. And I don't think that's ended. I don't think it's ended. They were supposed to, when you get charged finally, there was judges that have said you're supposed to reveal to the defendant that how they caught him in the first place. And that's never really happened. They've kept it all secret so far. So that's what the NSA does. They were supposed to be spying on foreign, enemies. And the latest article 2 days ago is that the hacking tools that the U.S. has used, and viruses and everything, malware, all the stuff that the U.S. does to its enemies, have all boomeranged back on the United States. One of the key ones was the virus that they planted in Iran in order to wreck their centrifuges. And guess who it infected? Chevron. Our good buddy Chevron. It infected a whole bunch of things. And so the hacking tools themselves, now China has gotten them, but they said China got the hacking tools from the NSA.
That's right.
I'm just thinking, I wrote on Facebook, I said, there might be a reason in the old religion, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and reap what you sow. There's some reasons for this, because everything we think we're led to believe, we're sold as hurting our enemies, this evil that we're doing to our enemies, and everybody cheers for, we're getting the Venezuelans and the Yemenis, and we're all happy with it. It all comes back on us. And that's what's happening with freedom of the press as well. We think we're curtailing the foreign freedom of press. My CIA colleagues in VIPs did this. They planted op-eds in foreign press. They were trying to use information warfare all over the world. And this was even during the Cold War and everything else. And Americans are happy with that, right? If we plant op-eds in China and whatever, we're trying to propagandize them. It's all come back to haunt us now, because the rule that was only we were supposed to use propaganda on foreigners got dropped. And now they can use it on Americans. So all of it's boomeranged back.
Well, not just now. If you're familiar with COINTELPRO, right, you know that they were doing that kind of CIA. In fact, I've read, you can read a lot of stuff and say they admit that they planted stuff here. And so I think what you're getting at too, Coleen, is you got to see that from the U.S. government's perspective, and from we're the enemy. We are, yeah, because you had the potential. Can't nobody else overthrow these guys, right? We have the potential, and they're aware of it. That's why they spend so much time propagandizing us, right? That's why they spend so much time teaching Western civilization and talking about white supremacy and all that, because they gotta keep us at odds with one another, right? They've got to keep us separated. Any kind of way you can think of it, they figure out a way to keep, because they want to keep your mind off the treasure, right?
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. All right, everybody, let's thank our speakers. And please stay around for informal questions and help yourself and buy some books. Thank you.
Good job.